Okay, welcome back. We are in AP English. This is Introductions to Plato's Republic. We are now going to move on in our discussion of Republic 2. The first thing I want to say before I get to the Glaucon question again for Republic 2 is this. There is an easy numerical mnemonic that can help you remember the basic arguments of Republic 1 through, and this works pretty good for about up through Book 4. Sometimes you could stretch it to Book 5. What do I mean by the word mnemonic? Of or related to what? What's a mnemonic? Does anyone know that word? Of or related to memory. The word mnemonic is actually spelled with an M. M-N is how the word is spelled. Of or related to memory. Watch how this works. Write down on your paper Republic 1, Republic 2. In Republic 1, there is one important question that gets asked. Write down what it is, don't say it out loud. What is the one important question that gets asked of Republic 1? It will be the question of Republic. And it is what? What is justice? Is the word, it normally gets translated, it's the word justice. I like to translate it as, what does it mean to do the right thing? That helps you wrap your brain around this idea of what justice means. Republic 2, there will as well be a numerical number, mnemonic way to remember, that will happen in Republic 2. And when we get there, you'll go, oh, I totally get it. When we get to Republic 3, there's going to be something related to the number 3. When we get to Republic 4, there's going to be something related to Republic 4. And we don't have to stretch this. It's like it's right there. I should point out, Plato didn't create the Republic this way. The Republic itself is supposedly a single dialogue in one sitting. Now, for those of you who are wondering how long it takes you to be able to actually engage in the entire dialogue, you can sit down and start reading and time yourself and see, without getting up to go and do anything, how long it takes you to actually read the entire. It's a long, long dialogue. That is to say, clearly Plato's inventing a dialogue that probably never took place, at least not in its entirety like that. Does that make sense, right? But there's scholars who would then divide up the Republic into books. Those books can be easily remembered with this numeric thing, at least up through Book 4. Some of you can push it to Book 5 to keep a mnemonic that will help you to remember. Now I'm to Republic 2. Republic 1, a couple of important things, right? We've got the introduction of the question, what is justice? We have the Thrasymachon response. What was the Thrasymachon response by Thrasymachus? What is it? Might makes right. The one with the biggest weapon, or the one with the most power, is the one who gets to determine what's right and what's wrong. There's no such thing as a absolute right or an absolute wrong that then we all kind of learn about. Rather, we kind of make it up depending on how much power we have. That's the Thrasymachon argument. Socrates, remember, jacks that argument by saying, yeah, but if 4 guys go to go to rob a bank and one of them stays in the car, the other 3 of them assume justice. They assume it. So, for example, even though they're committing an immoral act, if they come running out of the bank and their pal is driven off, they assume something's wrong, right? That the guy did something wrong. Remember, back to the question, what does it mean to do the right thing? Why would they assume that if they're bad guys? That is an intriguing question. If they're totally bad guys, why would they assume that the driver drove off and did anything wrong? Why wouldn't they just come out and say, well, we're breaking the law by going into a bank and stealing other people's stuff? I guess it stands to reason that he probably drove off because he didn't want to get caught or whatever. Right? See how that works? Why would they instinctively assume, uh-oh, he did something wrong to us? These are bad guys who are stealing from the bank. See, Socrates will say to Thrasymachus, this seems to argue that even bad guys have some sense of this thing called justice. Where does that come from? And Thrasymachus kind of goes away. Glaucon, Republic 2, Glaucon picks up the argument. And he says, I really have a question, Socrates, and I want you to try and help me out here. He plays the game of the myth of Gyges, a special power that allows this shepherd boy, notice he has absolutely nothing, right? Shepherd boy, completely poor, finds this ring that gives him the total power because he has the power of invisibility. I mean, if you'll think about it, that'd be the total power, wouldn't it? Right? I mean, if you could make yourself invisible and nobody could see you, you could pretty much do anything you wanted to do. In some ways, it almost beats flying through the air or any of those kinds of superpowers. The power of invisibility allows him to be, as Glaucon calls it, like a god. Like a god. He can do whatever he wants. Of course, the myth of Gyges suggests that Gyges doesn't do good things with this ring. No, not at all. Rather, he does terrible things with the ring because he can get away with it. Notice that's the central part of the myth of Gyges. He can do it because he can get away with it. They come to get him, for example, he just twists the ring and it's done, right? Now notice how Tolkien plays the game of the ring, but he's going to play the game of the ring corrupts you. The more you use it, the more corrupted you become. Tolkien, of course, kind of playing with the myth of Gyges, but extending it. I give you the myth of Maverick as a way to try to wrap your brain around the argument. You're working at Maverick, the money falls on the floor. You have the ability to just ignore that it fell, let the woman leave, and now you've got 5 bows. The question that Glaucon will ask Socrates is not, should I take it or not? Let's point that out. That's not Glaucon's question, should I take the money? That's way too simpleton a question. Okay, that's way too simple. The question is, I think most people would take the money if they knew they'd never get caught. That's the key. If they knew they'd never get caught and punished, or if they knew there would never be any kind of a reward or whatever, right? So for example, maybe you see the money fall and you go, oh, that's 5,000 bones, but it's possible this is a test, and if I tell her the money's there, she's going to give me $10,000 as reward for being honest. See, that's the same thing, right? You're doing it for a reward or for fear of punishment. Glaucon says, I'm pretty sure most people would take that if they knew they would never get caught. Can you give me an argument otherwise? That's Glaucon's question. It goes right to the heart of what human nature is. What are humans really like? When you put them behind a Maverick and $5,000 is on the floor and they can take it and never fear getting caught, why wouldn't they take the money? It makes no sense. Socrates wants to enhance the question. He'll make it even more difficult. He will say, let's take that notion of context or situation completely out. You might, for example, be able to legitimate in your mind taking the money, for example, to give it to a good cause like a charity, or taking the money because you need to get, you need it for some reason. So it's such a situation, Socrates says, let's not allow it to matter. Every single time you give the money back. And even more importantly, you give the money back and you're happy about it. You're not sad about it. You're like, crap, I wish I didn't have to give the money. No. You actually, are you ready for this? Want to give the money back. It's at that point Glaucon says that argument can't be made. He says, I'm sorry, you can't make it to me, and I know too many people you couldn't make it to. If they do give it back, they're going to give it back begrudgingly, like, crap, I wish somehow I could have $5 grand. And that's the way we are. Glaucon says, I hate to admit this about myself and other people, but that's just the way I am. With that in mind, we now will turn to the Socratic Answer. Now the Socratic Answer, put it in your notes, this is huge. The Socratic Answer will begin in Republic 2, and we will not get an answer fully until Republic 7. So that's huge. It's going to take 5 books of Republic to get us an answer. All right? Now what's funny about this is by the time we get to Republic 7, you will be able to reduce the entire argument down to 2 lines. You will. You will be able to reduce the entire argument down to 2 lines. All right? It's not a difficult argument by and large. It's really not. But Plato's going to take his time. And the reason he's going to take his time is he's inventing Western philosophy. Along the way, he's pretty much going to invent Western philosophy. He's going to come up with about every major discipline at university, and we're going to be talking about it. And along the way, we're going to get all these tangential questions. So for example, I'm going to ask you Socratic questions. I'm about to do it here in a second. And you're going to find yourself saying, holy cow, I never thought about that. I promise you this is going to happen. I never thought about that. All right, as we get into this discussion. All right, so here we go. The Socratic Answer. We're now at the very beginning of the answer. We again won't get a full answer until Republic 7. Put a star next to 7. Because Republic 7 is the heart of Republic. It's the most important book. If you're ever taught this at university, most of you, it will be Republic 7 and only Republic 7. Okay, they actually take Republic 7 out of this dialogue and often will give it to you at university and have you read Republic 7 without having read Republics 1 through 6, and that to me is kind of a tragedy. Okay, so here we go. I'm on the whiteboard now. You want to kind of make sure you can see my whiteboard. we're now going to go, specifically you have to do this because Socrates does this. Socrates is now with Glaucon and the rest of the interlocutors who are kind of watching. Thrasymachus is sitting over in the corner pouting, right? And Socrates says, okay, listen, you've asked me a tough question. I made it even tougher. But the way I'm going to answer the question is to ask you a question back. That sounds very Socratic, doesn't it? He says, imagine for a moment that I were to walk up to my whiteboard and I were to draw a little sign like this and I were to put some words on it. And then I had you stand at the back of the room and I told you to read that sign to me. It would be difficult, right? And Glaucon says, yeah, right. For your notes, by the way, we call these in the Republic and elsewhere arguments from analogy. Arguments from analogy. If you want to learn how to think strongly, to think strong, study Republic, study Plato. One of the ways you learn to do it is through this argument from analogy, where you have one thing that helps you to understand something else. Watch how it works. Socrates says, yeah, but check this out. What if I went and drew this really big sign, and then I put the same words from that little sign on the big sign? Let's say I put it in 123 font, and then I had you stand back there. Right? Which one of the two signs easier to read? And Glaucon's like, well, it gets dark at night, obvious question, right? Yeah, obviously the bigger sign. Socrates says, right, follow. You have asked me about justice in the individual, right? Why should I give the money back when it falls on the floor, correct? Justice in the individual. That is a difficult question. Socrates says, the little sign, can you see why we say Republic 2? Right? The little sign, hard to read. The big sign, justice in the group, or the state, or let's just call it what we call it today, what, Mr. Batson?
Society.
The title of the dialogue. Right? Justice in the Republic. The group. Okay? Now think about this in regards to our university training. You can talk about the individual, we call that psychology, or you can talk about the group or the society, and we call that sociology, right? So what Socrates will say to Glaucon is, let me do something. And this is huge. You've got to understand this. If you don't understand what I'm saying right now, you're going to struggle through much of the arguments of Republic. You will sit in university lectures and you will hear your own profs make observations about Republic. Socrates was a communist, Plato was a communist, blah, blah, blah. And you're going to be tempted to just raise your hand and say, I'm sorry, I think that's a misreading of Republic. And here's why. Socrates is interested in the Glauconian question of the individual. To get there, he's going to play a game of analogy and say, before we talk about justice in the individual, let's talk about justice in the group. If we can figure out what makes the just or the perfect, let's go ahead and use that word, right, group, we can then, watch my whiteboard, we can then take that and extrapolate back to the individual. Okay? Now Socrates is going to go on a 5-book rant. I say rant. I mean, he's gonna talk a lot, okay? And for those of you that are actually trying to read this crap as opposed to just looking at the Cliff Notes or the, my summary lectures or whatever. For those of you that are actually trying to read this stuff, power to you. Power to you. It is true. I've had a few AP students who actually read every word of Republic, and it's like climbing Everest. It is. It's challenging. There's a lot of words, but ultimately what Socrates is doing is he's going to ask a very simple question. What is the perfect group? Let's even write it down as the ideal family. Okay? Or society. Or, go ahead and write down this word, because so many of your ball players, team. Team. If we can figure out what makes an ideal group, we can then take that information, extrapolate back to the individual, and we might be able to figure out what does a just individual look like. In other words, for our argument from analogy, and we can argue whether in the end we like this argument or not, this analogy. The individual is kind of like the group, and the group is kind of like the individual. Okay? Now with that in mind, Socrates is going to ask a very simple question. What kind of family do you want to live in? What kind of group do you want to be a part of? Okay? That's going to be our first question. By the way, I use the word perfect. Most of your translators use a different word. Ideal. Okay, ideal. It's our word perfect, all right? It's our word perfect. What is the best kind of group to live in? Okay? Now, I have ways to try and help you, like the myth of Maverick, to try and get your brain around what the questions are of Republic. Let me ask another one, and this one will help you. This is not Plato, this is McGee. I hate to say this out loud, but what I'm about to say is absolutely true. And for some of you, it will blow your mind. This morning, in this very town this morning, I promise you this is true, some adult pushed through a door of some kid under the age of 5, walked into that bedroom and went, "Get up." That happened in this town this morning. Didn't happen to you, but it happened somewhere in this town this morning. Started screaming profanity at the child, knocked him around a little bit. That kid didn't get nothing to eat. That kid didn't get nothing to eat. That kid never gets nothing to eat in the morning. They ain't nothing to eat where he lives. It's called his place. It ain't called his home. That's his kid. That didn't happen to you. That did not happen to you growing up. And you're sitting here. You're sitting here. Question. If you could make the perfect family, the one you actually would want to live in, maybe not the one you do live in, but the one you would want to live in, and you got two options. Option A, a 5-year-old gets woken up in the morning by, "Get up, you SOB," or, "Lovey, it's time to get up. I got a meal ready for you." Which one would you choose and why? That's the Socratic question. But Glaucon's going to answer, that's not even really a question. That's like a no-brainer, it gets dark at night, obvious kind of question. That's not really even a question. It's kind of what we call a rhetorical question. It's a question without any real necessary investigation. Of course you would say, of course you'd want to live in a family where you don't have, right? Of course. What about ball club? If you're a part of a ball club, what kind of ball club would you like to be a part of? One where everyone's argue, drama all the time, fighting all the time, screaming at each other, talking about each other. No one likes the coach doesn't like anybody, right? Friction versus, well, let's go back to Glaucon's model. Remember I told you that this little model here, can I just put it right there next to the side? Remember this little model here? You have the beginning of a group. Let's call it A. We're in Republic 2 now. You have the beginning of the group. We'll call it A. The group gets together and it starts working together for a while. But then all of a sudden, a lot of groups go and they just die out. Right away. Right away. They got no chance. Right? But every once in a while, a group begins, watch my whiteboard, this is fascinating. A group begins to ascend. If they're a team, they start winning. If they're a group, they start gelling. If they're a family, they start to get along. Right? We'll call it ascending. We know that this happens. I mean, if you've ever been on a crummy team before, or you've ever been in a crummy family before, or you've ever been in a crummy group before, you kind of know all about this, right? You've been there, done this kind of thing. As opposed to if you've ever been in a group where people actually are friends and get along, right? But there then becomes, by the way, we'll call this B, the Ascension. There then becomes a moment I'll just circle the apex here. There then becomes a moment when people start looking around. And all of a sudden they begin to look over their collective shoulder to a golden age. A time when things were better. Things start to be going downhill. Going downhill. This we'll call C. Now watch my whiteboard, and we're already ready to the very beginnings of some of the brilliance of Plato. He will say it this way about any group. He says, if you can figure out, watch this, this is amazing. If you can figure out what causes that, you might be able to keep that from happening. That's why we call it political science. I'll say it one more time. If you can figure out what causes the ascension, why is it some groups can do this while other groups end up doing this? If you can figure out this, you can keep that from happening. The declension part. Okay? So Socrates now will ask a simple question. What causes that? And by the way, we'll make this point and then we'll call it a day, all right? What causes the ascension? When you look at a family that gets along, when you look at a ball club that's winning, when you look at a group of people that are successful, what is it that leads to this ascension thing at its core? Fundamentally, what is it? And the answer for Socrates is simply, we have multiple words for this out of translation. Unity, harmony, balance. The word, Mr. Wilson, that I'm going to stick with for most of my lectures will be that word right there. Harmony. Harmony. Okay? There seems to be, in a family you call successful, less of that, right? And more of this. Right? By the way, all of the ideas of Republic can be taught to a 6-year-old. I know I've done it. And they totally get it. Totally get it. There's no confusion about the fundamental ideas of this intense philosophy. One of them is, would you rather get woken up at 5? Would you rather get woken up to the face, get up, you sorry scumbag? Or would you rather get up with peace and harmony within the family? That is a knockdown, no-brainer kind of question. Right? So now it becomes very simple. A question is simply, if this is the key to having a good team, a good club, a good family, if this is the key to this, what is it that leads to this? What is it that leads to the C? What is it that leads to declension? If unity or harmony is what gets us ascending, what leads to descending, Mr. Batson? Disunity. Right. All we got to do is write the prefix dis in front of it. Disharmony. Disunity. Right? Glaucon says, yeah, you're right. That's totally right. So a simple question now. Are you ready for this? Remember, we're looking for justice within the group so we can look for justice within the individual, the small sign, right? We've already begun to ask the question, where does the perfect family come from? What makes it perfect? The answer is, there's some sense of harmony. You don't have some 5-year-old getting the ever living snot beat out of her in the morning. Somebody takes good care of her. Harmony. So now there becomes a simple question. Within the group, how do you achieve that? If you can figure out how to achieve that, you've done something. Glaucon says, yeah, you're right. Notice the assumption is, are you ready for this? The assumption is, that's a worthy question to ask. Can you actually build a group that is harmonious? Is it possible? Socrates will say, yes, but it all depends on one thing. This is our last comment of the hour. It all depends on one thing. And that is this. It all depends on education. Plato will be the great inventor of the idea that it all comes down to how you're taught, to how you're educated. Now, I'm going to say one final comment about this. You're going to want to write it down, and then you're going to spend the rest of the weekend, along with your foolishness, thinking about it. Are you ready for this? I told you I was going to give you a question that would blow your mind. Batson laughed, so now I'll do it. Socrates says the following: when you hear and see this word, education, do not think schooling. Whoa, way wrong answer. Way wrong answer. Are you ready for this? Socrates says, your education began before you were born. Your education began before you were born. Your education began before your parents were born. And tracks back even into your grandparents. In other words, long before you were born, people were being exposed to stuff that would ultimately affect you. Which is why right now, if I started giving my lecture in Indonesian, most of you wouldn't have a clue, because I'm speaking a language you don't know. You did not choose to speak English. It was given to you. You didn't choose it. Question: name one thing you chose to learn before the age of 5. Of course, we can backtrack it if you want to before the age of 2, and then that's a knockdown argument. One thing you chose to learn before the age of 2. Socrates says this, right? Socrates says everything that you are is linked to your education. Your education is firm by the age of 5. It's already starting at 2.
A couple, 3 announcements here before we head out.
Go ahead, take a thought on that one. What you choose to learn before the age of 2. Anything?